Alright. Hello everyone. This is going to be kind of an airbrush rant, and it kind of hits on what I talked about on my other channel about not worrying so much about what I use in particular, because it's kind of like asking about paintbrushes. It's kind of a personal thing, and depending on, you know, the style of painting that you do, and particularly with airbrushes, if you're heavy-handed or light-handed, and we'll get into what that is, it really depends. Like, you know, if someone says, hey, this right here, the Infinity by Harder Steinbeck, is the best airbrush, it's wrong. If I tell you the Sotar 2020 from Badger is the best airbrush, that is wrong. If I tell you the Chrome, also from Badger, is the best airbrush, that is also wrong. And it comes down to the three things that we mess with the most, which is paints, brushes, and then some of you guys that are actually getting into airbrushes, is that it's when someone tells you that this paint line is like, okay, Les is sponsored by Vallejo, so I'm gonna plug this. I won't tell you it's the best paint out there, but it's what I use. It's my preference, and this is what I use for, you know, most of my stuff. Same thing with the airbrushes. I started out with this airbrush, which is the Iwata HPCS, and then I read somewhere that Matthew Fontaine was using the Infinity from Harder Steinbeck, so I figured I'd buy that and stuff. But it seems to be like, I watched the 7-Day Army painter Brandon Palmer said that this is the best airbrush on the market, and it's really not. There really is no best airbrush. It's what's best for you. So, you know, when people say, hey, this is the best airbrush, don't just go out and buy it like I did. Just you know, take it with a grain of salt and keep it in mind. That's something that someone you appreciate uses. Like Matthew Fontaine, I'm a big fan of his, and he uses Harder Steinbeck stuff. He uses this one, and he uses some other brush they make called the Kolani, and you know, that's what he uses. And I bought it because, you know, I saw that he used it, and you know, I found out that I didn't really use it that much, because the tip and needle set that this came with was a 0.15, which is really tiny. This is for like touching up photos, really small stuff. And for what we do, like general purpose, this turned into my general airbrush, the Iwata HPCS, and that's what I used for general duty. That was for the base coating, everything else. The Harder Steinbeck gets in there nice and fine, but that's not what we want. We want it to diffuse and create the blend for us. When you get too fine, you lose the whole purpose of why you use an airbrush on certain things. So, I mean, yeah, you can bring it back, but I mean, buying the airbrush just because it can go in and do a hairline or something like that, that's a bad way to do it. What's the difference between a $100 airbrush, this, you know, $200 airbrush, and all the rest of these Badger airbrushes? Well, a lot of it has to do with hypersensitivity. Like, what, you know, eBay specials, I don't have any of those, but I know some of you guys do. The big difference between, say, this and my buddy Darth Byrne at Gamers Guild, he uses like a $600 Iwata, and the difference between that is the internals and the trigger mechanisms. And you may not be able to tell unless you're airbrushing for a while with maybe a cheap one, and then all of a sudden you get a $600 one in your hand and you notice how smooth the trigger action is. And that's very important, is to have the hypersensitivity to, you know, when I pull back just a tad, you know, you get, you know, micro amounts of paint and things like that, and to be able to do fine detail. And there's a difference between a guy who's spraying a t-shirt and, you know, doing a shadow on a palm tree versus someone who's touching up a photo and trying to airbrush an eyelash in. There's a big difference there. So the Harder Steinbeck, it's good. It's not the best, even in airbrush standards. If you go on the forums, they say this airbrush is pretty much deemed good for the price. It's not, you know, the big one that a lot of people are using, but it just depends on where you go. If you look at the kit builder community, the guys that do the large resin models of, like, you know, Frankenstein and stuff like that, if you look at Kit Builder magazine, they are always talking about the Sotar 2020. And the Sotar 2020 became my detail brush. So this was general duty. This one was detail. When I got sponsored by Badger, Sotar 2020 was the detail, and where's my other brush? It's the this is not all of them. It's what I could fit in the frame, but the Patriot 105, that was my general duty brush. And the reason I show you all these is because I didn't just buy one airbrush and decide to say, you know, hey, you know, I know a lot about airbrushing now. I used a lot of the main brands. I used the Eclipse. I had the Harder Steinbeck. Still have them. Just don't use them anymore. And then I'm using all the Badger stuff now. And these are all different airbrushes. There's gravity feeds. There's siphon feed, things like that. And I also use the Testors Aztec. And one of these big airbrushers that does like fantastic murals and stuff, he mainly uses the Testors Aztec, but he even tells you, like, you know, that's what he prefers. There's no such thing as a best airbrush. So when you hear reviews about airbrushes, paints, and actual paintbrushes, keep it in your head. So if there's someone that you like and then you start to see that, like, maybe your favorite painters are all using the same type of airbrush, then you kind of have, you know, an idea, if you're just getting into the hobby, what to get. Like, okay, you know, I see a lot of people are using the Winsor Newton Series 7, the DaVincis. A lot of people don't talk about it, so, you know, I send them over to the brush video to talk about what's so special about the Series 7 or the DaVincis versus, you know, the Econo packs where you can get, you know, 30 airbrushes for like $6 or something, and there's a big difference. But you know, that's covered in the other video, so I won't talk about that. But, you know, it's like, yeah, okay, I prefer Vallejo, but it's really about, you know, what you prefer. If you like to dip your brush in the pots versus using a dropper bottle, if you're airbrushing, you know, this and that, you might say that one paint is really easy to use. You don't have to dilute it. Some people, you know, it's all subjective. It's based on the person that's doing the stuff. So don't just, oh, because Les uses this brush and he has this airbrush, yeah, okay, I got all these airbrushes, you know, you guys are watching, are you gonna go out and buy all these because you see that I have them? No, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't expect you to do that. And I can show these because Badger knows that they're not the only airbrush company out there, and they know that I didn't start out using their brushes. So it's really preference, and it's airbrushes are, it's hard to say that because you can't just do it like paintbrushes. You can't go out and buy each and every one of these just to find out which one works for you. It just comes over time where maybe you have one airbrush that you got from a friend or you bought on eBay or something. You use it, you get used to it, and then you get a new airbrush because you read about it or someone else, you know, talks about it and, you know, thoroughly reviews it, and then you think, wow, you know, maybe that's good for what I do. So that was pretty much the rant part. I already soaked up 8 minutes of that doing it. Now let's talk about all these airbrushes. I put in over 20 hours using each of my airbrushes so that I would know about it. Specifically, you know, the Harder Steinbeck, liked it a lot. I got the solo version of it without all the doodads, but it still has everything. It's got the little needle stop, so you can preset it, but I never use it because depending on the thickness of your paint, your settings aren't going to work except for that one color. And so if you're doing, you know, illustration using just black ink all the time, then okay, you know, you can use that setting and it's going to be pre-thinned and stuff. But it, you know, it's really nice, engineered. The problem that I had with this was when I finally bent the needle, which is very easy. When you're painting with acrylics, you have a problem with dry tip, which is you'll be painting and slowly while you're painting, paint builds up, and then all of a sudden your airbrush starts to act weird and you look and there's paint buildup right on the tip. Well, that 0.15 millimeter needle is so tiny that if you try to do the regular thing, which is the pinch where you put your nail on it and pull off the paint, you bend the needle every time you do that slightly, and it messes up the brass fitting that goes around that needle, and slowly you start to lose control over it, where, you know, the needle's fully forward, you press the airbrush, and if you held it down on paper, you'd actually start to see little bits of paint come out. So you lose the seal, and then you have to go out and buy the stuff. And there's only 2 distributors that I found in the U.S. that actually carry Harder Steinbeck parts, which is Chicago Airbrush Supply and TCP Global. And it is expensive. It's like $40 for a needle tip set. And that was last time I checked, though, so I may be wrong for all you guys that might rivet count on me and go analyze prices. But the Iwata Eclipse is, you know, an international standard, so a lot of places carry parts for these. It's a very good airbrush, and I liked it a lot. It put a lot of work in for me, and the main thing was, I wouldn't say that the Badger is better than the Eclipse or the Eclipse is better than the Badger. I'd just say that Badger, their warranty and their prices are fantastic. I mean, you can't beat the warranty. If I were to say that Iwata's were the same as Badger as far as quality and performance, the thing that would sell me would be the warranty. That if anything goes wrong with my airbrush, I need to get packings redone and things like that, I can just send it back to Badger, lifetime parts labor thing, you know. So I send it in, they fix it, send it back to me, maybe a small bill for, you know, a couple parts, which maybe, you know, anywhere from $6 to $15 or something, which is nothing. And that's one thing, like if you're gonna go with a cheap brand, make sure that you can get parts for it, whatever brand that you decide that you want to go get. What am I currently using right now? Well, recently Badger came out with the Renegade Chrome, and all the other Renegades, some of you guys have them, they have this like gunmetal, like kind of dark brown anodizing like plating on them. The new Chrome is actually got a nickel plating versus the other ones. They kind of, you can't really tell, but or maybe you can. The Chrome kind of has a more blue, like a blue silver to it, and then the old Badger plated stuff kind of has a gold tint to it, even though they're both silver. You might not be able to see that, but I could see it. And this brush combined the 2 brushes that I was using, the detail brush and the general duty brush, which was the Patriot 105. Well, what happened is that instead of having to buy the 2 airbrushes, or to have 2 airbrushes for what I like to do, I just had one, because the Chrome combined both of them, and it was cheaper. The Sotar is like $300-400, and the 105 is like 100 something. This, I think the Chrome right now is going for $150 at one online retailer. Forget the name of it. I'll put a link for it below. And I think even if you go to Freak Flex, you can find the Chrome for, or the Sotar, I think for like $98. So you can search around and find the brushes for cheap, brand new. Just got to find people that are selling stuff. But this brush does everything for me now, the Chrome. So if I was gonna say what I don't like that people do, which is to say, hey, if you're gonna get an airbrush, get a Chrome. This is what I would tell you to use, because this is what I use. But take it with a grain of salt. Just because I use it doesn't mean it's gonna work for you. A lot of people say if you have heavy hands, like you know, you're not really, you know, sensitive with your fingertips and able to control, you know, squeezing the trigger, Iwata's work really well. And for, you know, more precision stuff, you know, you get into the Harder Steinbecks, which, you know, the Harder Steinbeck does a fine line, but like I said, I only used it maybe 5% of the time, and it was clogging a lot because of the small tip. And the Sotar does the same but less, because it has a point, I think it's a .21 needle in it, so it's slightly larger, but again, it does fine details. I could not tell the difference between the 2 of them as far as performance goes. They both have the same stuff. This one's got the needle stop also. The Sotar feels a bit lighter. It's got this little finger mount that helps it fit a lot better. And I'd say another reason that I like the Badgers is their weight distribution. They weight the back of their airbrushes so that the airbrush feels nice in your hand. It just kind of sits there while you work, rather than you having to like grip onto it so the front doesn't sag down. It's pretty nice. I became a balance nut because I got used to the weight of the Badger airbrushes, and the Sotar is actually really light. So the 105 was heavier, and I loved it, and that's pretty much what the chrome did. The chrome grabbed the needle stop, the cutout, and the reason you want the cutout is for easy cleaning. You put your medium in there, you press the air down, and you flick back on this, you know, a bunch of times, and you clean it out into your, you know, airbrush cleaning pot or whatever. But that's exactly what that's for, so you can make those the quick cleaning and things like that. And if you just want to leave it open while you do that, Badger's got this little pullback stop where you pull it back, and some of them have the cutouts on the side where you can actually, you know, flip it to the side. The Sotar's got that, so you can pull back, flip it to the side, and it locks the air or the needle wide open. So you can just press the air down, the needle's wide open, and then drop your cleaning fluid down in there. So as soon as it hits, it shoots right out. And that's another way to quick clean the airbrush. So let's see, what else did I want to talk about? All the Renegades come with very small tips. These are precision airbrushes that come, you know, ready to do detail, but they're not so small that they're impractical for what we do in the hobby. And you know, we need to get in there fine, but not ridiculously fine. So trying to find the place that's got the smallest needle set, you know, you kind of work yourself into a corner, and that's what I did when I bought the Steinbeck. I was like, oh, well, it's got a 0.15, and, you know, these other brands only go as small as a 0.25 or whatever, and, you know, getting it kind of was a pain, so it was clogging up on me all the time. So it's yeah, if I didn't have to use it, I wouldn't use it. So pretty much Badger has a bunch of airbrushes that do different things. I have cake decorating brushes, I have general duty brushes, things like that, and they're all around $100, every single one of them, and it just depends on what you want to do. Gravity feed, what's so good about not gravity feed, siphon feed? You use a bottle, stick it up into the feed tube right there, and you spray. Why would you want to do this? Well, if you're base coating 900 models, it'd be kind of better to have one of these than to say have the 100G here that's got like a half, I don't know, maybe probably not even an ounce, like a half ounce, maybe half ounce cup right here, spraying a bit, get one guy base coated, out of paint, got to refill again, keep going. It's one thing that you don't have to do. So if I was going to do a whole Marine Army, I'd get one of these siphon feeds and pretty much have 3 color cups that are full of the paints that I need, and then that way I can do like the 3 color highlights, have them all in 3 pots, do that, and when it comes time to detail, I can use the Chrome or the Sotar or the Renegade, something like that. And it's, you know, pretty much all these airbrushes, I could use them all. They're all the same. They have different setups as far as, like, you know, cup sizes, what kind of needle it comes with. They have, you know, you got the 100G and the Sotar. Sotar's got all these toys on it, different things to make it easier. 100G looks so plain next to it. It's got no cutout, it's got a simple weighted handle, whatever. Does the same amount of detail the Sotar does, but it's cheaper, and people want to pay for all these little doodads. Like I said, you know, I wouldn't buy an airbrush just because of this. I do like the cutout because that's how I clean my airbrushes, is pulling back on them. But like the needle stop, like I said, you know, it's so finicky, according, you know, depending on what kind of paint you have in there and how much it's diluted, that you're gonna have to adjust this all the time. And if you just learn to not use the autopilot, which is what I call it, you'll get better at controlling your airbrush, and then you'll just alleviate the whole purpose of that thing. So it's nice to have. Don't look at it as like an upgrade option. Same thing with the micro air valve on here. It's like, where are you airbrushing that your compressor isn't nearby that you can adjust it, and things like that. So let's see, assembly, pretty much all airbrushes are the same. They all have the same stuff. They might be differently shaped, like the harder Steinbeck's got these, you know, hexagon shaped, you know, needle slide areas, you know, things like that. But a lot of it has to do with internals. A lot of the cheap airbrushes, they'll have rubber gaskets on the inside which don't seal correctly, and you start to use solvent based paint and it's going to come out of there. and start to leak back into your trigger area, and it's not going to last that long. All the solvents that you might clean your stuff in, whether it's Windex, Simple Green, whatever, it's going to eat up that rubber. All the Badger airbrushes have Teflon in them, or they just don't even have a sealing. It's just metal to metal. So it's, you know, you pay for what you get, and you know the difference between the $100 airbrush versus the $600. A lot has to do with the internals, trigger mechanisms, a little bit more thought in the engineering process. So that's pretty much what you get. If you're a novice at doing airbrush stuff, you're probably not going to see the difference. But you know, don't think that, you know, if a company is going to charge you $400 more for a product, that something isn't special about it. Like they didn't, you know, they took more care about building it, the mechanisms, everything like that. You're not paying for the same airbrush that's just more expensive. It actually has, you know, some thought put into it, and that's the difference, you know, with the Renegade series versus, you know, entry level Badger stuff. But pretty much all the Badger brushes are around $100, except for the Sotar. The Renegades are probably closer to 200 than 100, but then again, you know, they're professional grade stuff. You look at the guys that are doing airbrushing on gas tanks and motorcycles and stuff like that. Most of the time they're using a Velocity of some kind, whether it's a Renegade of some kind, a Velocity, a Rage, the Chrome. It just really depends on what their application is. So, and those are the brushes that those guys have found work best for what they do. And that's the main point of this video, is to, you know, take the opinions of other people with a grain of salt. Just because I have this stuff doesn't mean you need to get it. You can hear my suggestion, but I just don't want someone to get something that I suggest and say, wow, this thing was a, you know, POS. You know, take it with a grain of salt. This is what I use all the time. Doesn't mean you have to buy it. Read about it. Check out some reviews, and look up applications, what people have been using it for, and say, you know, ask yourself, is this what I'm looking for? As far as, you know, what your purpose is for the hobby. Like, am I just going to base coat with it, this and that? You know, you can do all that. So, you know, don't take to heart, and don't concentrate too much on what other people are using. Keep it in your mind, but don't follow it as a main guideline for getting into the hobby. Don't, oh, okay, well, Les is using you know, Vallejo, so I have to get that. Some people don't like it, you know, and they rather use GW stuff or totally different brands. And same thing with the paintbrushes, the sizes. People ask me that all the time. What size brush do you use? Don't worry about that. I use a 0, and I use a 0 from different brands, and they're all different sizes, and that's what I'm comfortable using. A lot of people, like you know, Nataku, like I said in my other video, you know, he uses, you know, little baby eyelash, like 60-aught brush, and I'm not comfortable using those. So again, it's like a comfort thing. It's like me trying to tell you what kind of underwear to wear, and it's personal. Airbrushes, paint brushes, it's all personal. But, you know, listen to the people that have already invested money and get the guidelines for what they use, so you don't go out there and buy the wrong thing, like, you know, some cheap, you know, external feed airbrush, kind of like the GW spray gun, you know, things like that, and thinking that you can do a lot of detail with it when you can't. You know, use it as a guideline so that when you see it in the store and it's on sale or something, you can remember, okay, this person is using it, or I'm getting into the hobby, and people always talk about Vallejo, P3, Games Workshop, and this. Maybe these are the paints I should look into for getting into the hobby. So that's pretty much my airbrush rant. I had a, you know, I wanted to go through a bunch of stuff, and I wasn't just showing you this stuff to show off. I just wanted to show you that I have used a lot of different airbrushes, and, you know, I'd like to think that I kind of know what I'm talking about when it comes to what airbrushes to use when and things like that. So I just didn't want you to think, you know, okay, cool, I just bought an airbrush, and, you know, all of a sudden I'm telling you, you know, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. Ken is probably the expert, the president of Badger, and he could tell you more about it. But from just my personal experience, and specifically for our hobby, you don't need to go out and buy the most expensive thing ever. You just, you know, mess around, buy an eBay one or whatever, and get used to how an airbrush actually works. And then once you figure, you find a friend or something that has a nicer airbrush and you try it out and you can actually feel the difference, you can figure out for yourself, doing research, what brand you want to get and what kind of airbrush you want to get and things like that. So we'll go over again and I'll actually talk about what I look for in an airbrush, but I've soaked up 25 minutes of the time. I mean, we don't have a time limit, so I guess let's just keep going. An airbrush that I like to use a lot, the Patriot 105, has like a 0.3 needle, and the same thing with the Omni 5000 by Thayer Chandler, and those are good for general duty. They have big old fat needles in them that will base coat. They won't clog at all. I mean, I've thrown paint into, they'll spray pretty much anything out of the bottle, even game color, without thinning, because the needle's so big and it can push out large amounts. So base coating and doing your 3-color highlights, I like to use something that has a 0.3 needle at about 15 to 20 psi. And that's another thing with pressure, is the more pressure you have, you're gonna have to adjust it depending on whenever you're having problems with your paint, like it's coming out too speckly or something like that. If you've thinned it as much as you want to thin it, and you're like, well, that's the consistency of milk, which is the way to explain the consistency of milk, is if you've ever drinking milk out of a glass and you see the way that milk coats the glass, it should be, whatever paint you're mixing should be semi-translucent, and when you drag the paint up on the inside of the cup, you should be able to see through it slightly, and it should be, not more of a liquid than a gel. So if that makes sense, that's the best way that I could explain it, really. And if everything looks good as far as the paint goes and you're still getting speckling, then it's time to mess with the air pressure. At my air pressure, depending on how much detail I'm doing, if it's little detail, I might do like 10 psi, and if it's just base coating, it'll be as high as 20. But no matter what you're doing, if you're doing the spray outs, which you should always have like a piece of cardboard or something that you can test the spray before you actually put it on the model, is to pretty much look at it. If it's too speckly and you want it to be more gradient and fine, you up the air pressure. If it's coming out uncontrollably, like, you pull back just slightly, nothing comes out, slightly, you keep pulling back and all of a sudden, bam, it flows out, probably have the air pressure too high, and you probably need to clean your airbrush. But when you pull back on it and it's just out of control, like as soon as you get paint, it hits the surface and does a spider, which is where you get wet paint and then the air is so high that it pushes the paint outward and it creates these little spiders. Spider shapes, anyway. That's what we call them. That's pretty much too high, and you mess with it back and forth. It's just like using a paintbrush. When you first get an airbrush, you don't know how to use it right off the bat. You have to get used to using it. The big difference between it is that with a paintbrush, you get to see the tip of the brush touch the surface, and then you can go like that. With an airbrush, a lot of it's target practice. So just base coating and stuff, you start to work muscle memory, and you start to get better at looking at an area, and then your hand starts to hold the airbrush a certain way because it knows you want to shoot in this direction. And the more you do target practice, your eye and your hand start to work together, so that whenever you're like, oh, I want to spray here, it's automatically going to hold it a certain way. And you only get that after hours and hours of using it. And just pretty much, if you got a large army and you base coat it, you're going to develop muscle memory just from base coating, because your eye and your hand are going to see, like every time you look somewhere and you spray and then you notice that you're not spraying in the right area that you were looking at, your hand adjusts, and every time it adjusts, your muscle memory is starting to build up. So you get better and better over time. It's kind of cool. You get to like level up your hand at airbrushing skill. So pretty much I'm going to cut it off at that. If you guys got more questions, link it down below. I usually cover a lot of the common questions on my other channel, which is APJ Less. It's in my suggested channels link. It's the very top one on my channel page. Go to that page, and I usually keep it really informal like this one. And I just, I figured this was information I just wanted to put out because I know a lot of people are starting to catch on in the airbrush thing, and I want you guys to be informed that, don't just trust just one person's review. Go around the net. Don't even just look at this review and think, oh, okay, Les is totally correct, and I'm going to stop here and do whatever he said. No, go and check other people's reviews. See what they have to say. But just keep in mind that if they tell you this is the best airbrush, that their review is biased. Like, if they have no experience using other airbrushes, I think there's a channel on YouTube called Airbrush Reviews, and that guy is awesome because he'll look at the craftsmanship, he'll talk about how he modifies them, how they worked right out of the box, things like that. There's a bunch of channels out there. Do your research before you invest in anything, and then just knowing what us other people in the hobby, in the community are using, keep it as a guideline, but don't follow it too close-hearted. So anyways, I'm gonna end that. 31 minutes in. You guys have a good one.